Good morning and good afternoon, and thanks for joining us at the August Eloqua user group. Great to have you with us. Thanks for making some time. Today is all about unlocking the customer vault and capturing data that drives results. Essentially, a follow-on from last month where we talked about it was a masterclass, hopefully, in relation to preference management. And the preference management process is all about gathering the right sort of content and data that you need. And so this month we wanted to focus on what you can actually do with that data. And that largely falls to a personalization exercise. We'll look primarily at dynamic content and segmenting and how you can create smarter audiences. So let's dive in and have a closer look. So for the agenda, obviously welcome. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being with us. We also have Q&A, which provides you the opportunity to submit a question at any point following your registration or right up until about an hour or so before we go live. So feel free to log those questions at any point for dynamic content and dynamic segments, what that means for your campaigns. And then we wanted to introduce you to a concept of streams of communication. And we'll explain what that means in a bit more detail. And that will then follow in nicely to the concept of simplified persona based on one question. And then if we have time, we'll dive a little bit further into Release 24C, which is well underway at the moment. And many of you on the call today are probably already on Release 24C. So we'll cover a few points there for you as well. But as usual, you'll find more information on our blog. So please feel free to access the blog at any point. Now, we record our sessions using Zoom, so you can access them at any time on our blog. That's where the replays are posted. And throughout the session today, please feel free to use the Q&A to ask any questions. Please do that. We'd love to get questions and look forward to giving you answers. So any questions submitted, you should be aware, are public and are visible to everybody on the webinar, which gives you the chance to upvote those or even add comments to them as well. If you did want to ask something privately, you can use the chat function in order to do that. And I'm joined by Adrian Jones, who's our CEO and founder. So thank you, Adrian, for joining us this morning. And Adrian, keep him busy. He'll be looking after Q&A and chat for us. So yeah, please keep him busy. And my name is Derek Bell, for those who have not joined us previously. Thanks for making some time today. So questions. As luck would have it this month, there were no questions submitted. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to refresh everybody on how to do that. Essentially, once you register from the confirmation page, following your registration for the webinar, there's an opportunity for you to submit a question. If you forget and can't find that confirmation email and you think of a question, if you simply go to myeloqua.com, that will take you to a microsite that will enable you to do the same thing and to submit a question. And that will come straight to me. So I'll be able to work on that and build out a response for you throughout the next webinar. I may contact you directly before the webinar, but if not, I'll definitely answer the question during the live webinar. So yeah, keep me busy, please. Happy to do that. All right, let's dive in. And it seemed appropriate to have a little bit of an Olympic theme this month. So you'll see a few Olympic images, and we're going to talk about some personas in the context of some Olympians. So let's have some fun with that. So dynamic content and dynamic segments are really helping you deliver a more personalized CX. And surely at the end of the day, that's one of our key objectives, is to personalize our communications and to really get that information through to people and make it as easy as possible to build a relationship that will hopefully then turn into a relationship of trust, obviously with you and your brand and what you're trying to offer people. So let's have a look at that. In the context of dynamic content, one of the things that some people can get a little bit overwhelmed with how many options there are potentially, and well, how do I use it and what sort of application is there? And look, and the answer to that question is that there are many applications for dynamic content, because it is something that you can deliver both based on visual components, so using imagery with dynamic content, but also obviously copy and personalizing copy right down to things like subject lines and obviously the body of emails, and of course on landing pages. So landing pages can also carry that same dynamic content and deliver that same level of personalization that you would deliver via an email. Now, some will take the approach that, well, dynamic content should take me or save me time and mean that I don't need to build quite as many emails? Well, look, you could argue that is potentially the case, but I would suggest to you that it shouldn't be it, and is not really the number one motivation for trying to use dynamic content. One place that it's super helpful is in things like nurturing campaigns or any sort of always on type of campaign. If you think about a nurturing campaign, one of the objectives that you would generally have is that when somebody comes into the nurture campaign, you want to present them with a range of options to access content. And in the process of accessing that content, you want to ask them a few more questions and start to slowly build the profile over time. And if that's happening in the course of a nurture campaign that could potentially take in 5, 10, or more emails delivered over, say, a 4 or 5 month period, then there's every chance that halfway through that campaign, you're going to know more about the person halfway through the campaign than you did at the beginning of the campaign. Industry may be something that's super critical for you to understand about a person and delivering the right sort of tailored message. Now, you may not know their industry at the beginning of the relationship, but as they start to move through, they've downloaded something, they've told you which industry they're in. Fantastic. So now the dynamic content kicks into play. So instead of them seeing a default message in some of the emails, they'll now see a far more tailored message to somebody from their industry. That's just one application. There are so many applications, and we're going to talk about a few of them as we sort of move through today's webinar. But it really is helpful, as I say there, to present more tailored messages to segment members based on a whole range of things, industry being one of them, personas maybe something that you have in play. It could be the sales stage, using that information from the CRM platform to know where they're up to in the sales process based on opportunity data. It could be that they're a customer versus a prospect. There could be a whole range of things. Let's keep going and take a deeper dive. All right. So where can you actually use dynamic content? So I mentioned emails and landing pages. It works in exactly the same fashion on both of those. So you can actually create a single piece of dynamic content and in fact use it on both of those two assets, both on an email and on a landing page. And that dynamic content can be just copy, or it can be just imagery, or it can be a combination of the two. So you can bring them together. And how often do I do that? I'd probably say I create more dynamic content that is imagery one thing and copy another, but there certainly are applications where combining an image and copy into a single piece of dynamic content is appropriate and kind of works for me in relation to the messaging that we're trying to get across. Now, the other area that you can use dynamic content, and this is a screenshot from the email editor, where you can insert subject lines. So your subject line can be dynamic content as well. Now, that one's a really good one to start with, and it's a really easy one to start with, okay? So if you think about an event, for example, you're only running one event, but you may have different people from different backgrounds that you're trying to get into that particular event. So why not use some dynamic content in the subject line? Because we know how critical the subject line is to get someone to actually open your email. So let's tailor that subject line to a senior executive, potentially, versus the vice president, versus maybe directors, or even individual contributors, whichever that may be. If you're inviting people to a single event, but they're coming from different industries, maybe there's something that you can put into the subject line that will resonate more with them, that feels a bit more industry specific. You're obviously only running one event, so you can't really present different agendas to people, obviously. You're only running one event, but let's try and get a hook or something that will get them a little bit more engaged. And obviously personalization is a great way to do that. So yeah, think about it. If you've not played with dynamic content previously, have a think about subject lines and what you can do with those and how they could be a little bit more personalized based on your audience. So the way dynamic content works is that you need to create a series of rules. And the rules essentially determine exactly what people will see. Now, at a really basic level, you might have really good data about which state people are from or which province they're from, if you're from Canada. And that may be very important to you. You probably would round it up. I mean, my understanding of the US market is that we talk largely of kind of 4 regions, being sort of the East Coast, the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain region, and the West Coast. Please forgive me if my language is not quite right there. And those different regions are obviously a makeup of a variety of states. And so you may want to tailor messaging based on where people are based and maybe based on your offices. There could be a whole range of different things that you want to do. It could be about presenting the right salesperson to people. Maybe it's the salesperson who manages those particular geographies, for example. So really personalize it down so that when the email goes out, it's not just from the brand, it could actually be from the relevant salesperson in that particular space. So the whole range of applications. So I've got some examples here. I mean, you could think about varying content, for example, about a specific product or not, whether someone's based in one country or another, if they're a customer or not. There's a whole range of variables. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the level of data that you've got to drive that. Now, one of the excuses I hear sometimes from customers is, "Well, our data is just not that good. We don't have enough data." Well, you don't need to penalize your data or your clients where you do have good data and it's clear that you know where they are and what they do and all that kind of stuff, because you also got default capability with dynamic content. So you create your relevant rules, but if somebody doesn't meet any of those rules, you can then present a default. Okay. So the default would be generic. Now, a really great example of creating rules and showing content to some and not others comes down to the newsletter. The newsletter is one of the more common campaigns that most of us run as marketers. So if we look at this as an image that would represent sort of a wireframe of an email, we may have a static hero image, and that hero image is the same every newsletter. It's kind of the branding that goes along with it. So it's the same for everybody. Then you may do an introduction, but the introduction could be dynamic and have three pieces or three, in fact, two rules and one default. The default everybody gets if they don't meet rule X or Y. And so then you can create more tailored introductions to the newsletter and a setting for people that makes it a bit more relevant, potentially. You may then have a primary article. This is kind of like your hero story. It's the one that you want everybody to see, regardless of who they are, which products they have, which industry they're in. It's for everybody to see. However, as we start to move through the newsletter, we then start to play with, well, we have a particular update that we need to send to a group of A contacts. And this group of contacts, they only need to see it. And there's really no need for a default. Okay, so the default has to be there, by the way, but a default can be blank, meaning is nothing there. Okay. Now, this doesn't produce a big space in your email. It will, if there's nothing in the default, then everything just simply moves up in the email, which means if you've got an email with 6 articles, some people will see 6 articles and other people may only see 5 articles because they don't meet the criteria for that particular piece. And that's what I mean by blank default. Okay, so we keep going through. Now, the next one has a default. So there is a default article that you will be presenting, but then there are 2 other specific audiences you're wanting to create rules for. And so we might call them X and Y contacts, for example. Okay. Then at the very end of the story, you may have another static article. Again, this is a closing article. It's kind of what everybody sees. You want to make sure everybody gets that one. So it's not dynamic content. It's just simply, again, built directly within the email. And so that's one example of how you can create a single email asset for your newsletter and not have to create multiple editions of it. And one of the upsides of that too is the nice thing is that if you have your newsletter campaign live for a period of time, not just simply launching it on Monday to 3,500 people or 10,000 people or whatever the number may be, hitting send and letting it go. Okay, because it's possible that over the next week or 2 weeks or the next month, depending on the frequency of your newsletter, you may have new people coming to the database and their criteria, their profile, etc., meets the criteria for someone who should get the newsletter. And so we can go ahead and send out that newsletter. And so that's what a dynamic segment is doing for you. It's constantly listening for the life of the campaign to understand, well, hang on a minute, how about we send this same email to these new contacts? Okay, so it extends the life of your newsletter. It also means that new people coming into the database don't have to wait till next month in order to get the latest newsletter. They can get the most current newsletter delivered to them immediately. We'll look a bit more at dynamic segments here in a moment. Well, I wanted to show you an example. So this is one of our newsletters that you can subscribe to called Eloqua Important Updates. And some of you on the call may well be a subscriber. So what I've highlighted there for you is a piece of dynamic content. And in this particular example, there is no default value. That's why it says this inserted component has no content, because Eloqua will always show you the default when you look at it in the email. In this case, there is no default. Why is there no default? Well, there's a little chevron, a little gray chevron that I've just highlighted there on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you click on that, what happens is the next story or the next rule will appear. And so in this case, for this is a live edition, by the way, this is hot off the press. This is an update for Zoom users who are also Eloqua users. And so we know this because we collect this information and we invite people to tell us, are you using Zoom? Yes, you are. Fantastic. So we keep that on their profile. And so when things like this go out the door, we're able to tailor that. So if you're using Microsoft webinar products or GoToWebinar or something else, then obviously information about Zoom is of no interest to you. So what we're trying to do there is obviously tailor it and just present information to people that is relevant to who they are and kind of the tools and platforms that they're using. Now, what I wanted to highlight for you there next is the edit button. So from the edit button, you can click through and we can go and have a look at the actual dynamic content itself. And so in this example, you can see that there are two rules over on the left-hand side. Technically speaking, only one rule, I suppose. There's the default rule, and then there's the Zoom client one as well. And so the Zoom client one, you can add multiple. So if we knew and there were updates for Zoom and GoToWebinar or whatever else we wanted, then we can just simply hit the plus sign, start to generate the rules. And this is what the rules look like. So here in our database, we have a field called webinar platform, funnily enough. And we have that both on the contact and the account. And that covers us where we have leads in the CRM platform who are not associated to an account, but they've told us they use Zoom. So we hold that information at the contact level. And then, of course, as people are progressively converted and turned into an account within a CRM platform, then that's great because we have it at the account level and that's able to be understood then for all of the contacts that are associated to that particular account. Now, on the right-hand side, this is the important part as well, because you can get contact information that you can use to create rules. You can do the same with account fields within Eloqua. And you'll notice there's also has linked contact in custom object. So if you have very specific information contained on a custom object, then you can also use that information to present rules or to create rules to present different pieces of dynamic content as well. If you have the event module within Eloqua, you can see that's also something that you can attach there, has linked record in event. So that's specifically for those clients who have the add-on, which is the event module with Eloqua. So that's what it looks like. What I wanted to show you is what that newsletter actually looks like. So as I said, this newsletter is actually live at the moment. It's literally out the door and on its way to people. So here it is in Eloqua. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like. So here's that section, as I said, inserted component has no content. So if I just click on the right-hand side there, then you'll see that one particular article. Now, if I scroll down further, there is more dynamic content, which is here. So again, there's no default. The default is simply blank. And then we've got an article here. So this one is specifically for clients who we know are using Salesforce CRM with Eloqua. And it just talks about the integration app. So again, if you're using Microsoft or Oracle Sales Cloud or another CRM platform and you're not using Salesforce, well, again, it's of no interest. Okay, so we don't need to be flooding your inbox with information that's not potentially as relevant as it could be. Now, further down, there's another piece of dynamic content. Now, this one does, in fact, contain a default. And this one has a default because what we wanted to do here was if we knew which pod number your instance of Eloqua was stored on, and this is something that we ask again when people subscribe to, for example, important newsletter or the important updates. Once we know their pod number, then we can be specific and give them information in relation to when updates are actually taking place. So if we know their pod number, then we can sort of enrich that information and make that a little bit clearer for people. So if I have a look in the dynamic content and show you what that looks like, so you can see over here, here's my default rule. So you'll see there's no rules created here. It's just simply the default. So if somebody doesn't meet any of these criteria, or criterion, perhaps that should be, then they get to see the default rule. That's the basics. That's essentially how dynamic content works. If I wanted to add a new rule, all I do is click on the plus sign, a new rule is added. I then come over to the right-hand side, look at my relevant options in relation to contact fields, etc. Now, if you've built a lot of segments, this will be very familiar to you, okay? Because this is essentially the same way you build segments in Eloqua, okay? I'll put a silly value in there. You may then add an account field. You can do the same thing here with grouping your logic, creating ands, ors, those sorts of things. So you've got a range of options to play with. So if you've built segments in Eloqua, then there's a very good chance you'll have no troubles creating dynamic content and the rules that are associated with it as well. So there you go. That's how easy it is to create some dynamic content. All right, the next part we wanted to look at was dynamic segments. So a dynamic segment essentially is active for the life of your campaign. So you'll notice by default with Eloqua, when you drop your segment onto a campaign canvas or a multi-step campaign, that it is in fact static, okay? And you can change it. And that's what we want to do in some examples. So the ability to have people continuously flow into the campaign can really be time saving. It also extends the life of your campaign by increasing the audience potentially as they move through the campaign. It's just a smarter way to do things sometimes. A classic example, one of the examples I give all the time, is around an event. Most marketers will go through a process of devising an event of some sort. They usually consult with the sales team or potentially other parts of the business who may nominate individuals or potentially lists of people that they want to invite. It then comes time for you to launch the campaign, and marketing usually turn to sales and say, hey, is there anybody else? Is there anyone else you want us to invite? Like, no, you've got our list. It's all good. You activate the campaign, and usually about 10 minutes after you've activated the campaign, sales say, oh, here's another 50 people. Right. I'm sure that's happened to you. It's certainly happened to many people I talk to. If you've not created a dynamic segment, you then have to deactivate your campaign. You have to create a new segment. You have to add that to the canvas, reactivate your campaign. Now, it's not an overly onerous process. It's not that hard. But a much cleaner and easier way to do it is to, in fact, make sure that your segment is dynamic from the outset. So then you can say, yep, that's not a problem. Take the 50 people that sales have given to you, upload them directly into the live segment, and they will simply then flow into the campaign at a time frame that you've already nominated. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. But some examples are definitely always on and lead nurture campaigns that you always want to have dynamic segments, so that you're constantly looking for new people that qualify to come into the campaign. The other one is monthly and regular newsletters. So whether it's monthly or it's on a regular cycle, don't lose out by simply sending it once, okay, or activating it and then that's it. And then you have to wait another month or 2 months, or depending on the frequency. Make sure you have the campaign start and end dates set to a relevant time. If it's once a month, well, it should run for 30, 31 days, depending on the month, right? And then every day, if you want, you can do it every hour if you want, but every day you may want to check, is there anybody new that meets our filter criteria? Fantastic. And Eloqua will just automatically bring those people into your campaign. Another good example is things like NPS campaigns. So NPS campaigns, most companies will do those on a set schedule, and whether it's quarterly or whatever it may be, again, using a dynamic segment to automatically bring those people into the campaign is easier, cleaner, and I already talked about the benefit of an event registration campaign and how that can work. So what does that look like on the campaign canvas? So this is just a shot for you. Now, you will have noticed when you activate your campaign and then come back to it, your segment, the highlighted segment here at the top of the screen, turns to a gray color. So once you see it as gray, that means it's game over. Okay, that is finished. You can't add anyone else to that one. You can't. deactivating it and trying to add people and reactivating it is not the smartest way to do it. You would want to create a new segment in that case and drop a new segment onto the canvas and connect it to your email and have it go through that way. Or you can do as is highlighted here on the screen. So this is the add members once when the campaign is first activated, and that's the default, right? And you probably see that every day. The second one, though, is to add members regularly until the campaign is deactivated. So that's the end date, essentially, of your campaign. And you can set the schedule. So the schedule, the reevaluation frequency or schedule, can be set for 1 hour to whatever. It can be hours, days, weeks, and months that you can potentially reevaluate and get that segment to refresh and potentially bring new people in. And so the difference you'll notice with a dynamic segment, once it's set, is it remains green, like that highlighted green, for the duration of the campaign. And that tells you, without even having to double click and look at it, you can look at it. If it's green, you know it's in fact a dynamic segment, and then you'll get the number there as well. So that's 73 individuals when I took this screenshot who have been through that particular campaign. So that's the difference with static versus dynamic segments and audiences. Last month, we talked, as I said, a lot about preference management and all the different things that you capture about people. We want to try and ask questions, obviously, and gather information that is going to help us personalize and evaluate people's engagement, hopefully, in a better way. And so when you build out your segment, the thing I find, the process I follow typically is I build out my segment based on the values that I need and what I'm looking for. It's then a matter of actually looking at the segment. By that, I mean viewing the contacts, looking at the view and sorting it through. And do I see a disproportionate number in that particular segment of people from higher education, for example? Do I see a disproportionate number from manufacturing or financial services? And then maybe I see very few from medical services, for example. So I'd look at that myself and I'd be like, you know what? I think there's opportunity here to do a little bit of personalization based on the size of some of these particular audiences. Now, of course, I've had clients in the past who might only be sending an invitation to 35 or 40 people, but they could be 30 or 40 45, high net worth individuals. They could be, senior executives from influential organizations. And so you absolutely want to tailor quite well. So it doesn't mean you need to have thousands to do the personalization. The personalization can really come down to a few people, okay, depending on the values that you've got. Then the next step is to think about, well, okay, I've got my messaging. Here's what I'm sending out. How is my message going to differ based on those people from those different backgrounds? Is there really benefit in doing that? If there is, okay, let's dive in and let's have a look at it and see how dynamic content can help us. But think about ways that you can experiment with dynamic content, because there's also some great reporting to help you evaluate the performance of what you've been doing as well. So don't feel like you're doing anything in the dark. You can get some really good reporting out of Insight, which will be very clear based on all of those different rules, et cetera, that you've created. So easy places to use dynamic content, as we talked about before: subject lines, preview text in emails, the headings, body copy, and different calls to action. You may want to change the language in buttons, for instance, which is your major call to action. Use some dynamic content to drop in different buttons that different people see based on their profile and information that you have. The other classic one is imagery as well. Imagery can be quite a powerful, emotional, evoke really positive feelings for people and create good impressions. In Australia, it's very funny. We seem to do a lot of defaulting of the good old Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Sydney Opera House. Now, to most people outside of the country, they're fairly iconic symbols of Australia. But within Australia, it's seen as a very Sydney-centric thing to do. And it'd be a bit like saying, I suppose, well, it's a very New York thing to do. So Insight. So once you get into Insight, you will find a range of reports to do all sorts of different things. But there are two very specific reports that help you focus on dynamic content and evaluating the effectiveness of that dynamic content. And you can look at two, either at the campaign level or at the individual email level. I typically find I use the content by email report more than I use the campaign one, because I'm wanting to evaluate generally a very specific email and how that very specific email has performed. But it gives you some really good information. And I will quickly show you. Yeah, a little bit of time here. So let me just quickly show you what that looks like. And that's probably a good opportunity to also make you aware there are certainly some changes coming afoot, and some of you may already have made the move to the new Insight platform. You can see we haven't. Ours is scheduled for later this month. But if you come up here into the search bar, and this will be fundamentally the same in the new one. So if we go and just use the keyword dynamic, that's all you need. And you'll see two results come up. And so this is the dynamic content by email that I was suggesting. So I'm going to open that one. Now, of course, I need an email to test or to throw in. So I'm going to take this one because I know it's got dynamic content in it. Yeah, last 14 days will work because the campaign hasn't been running for that long. And drop in my email name, search. Yep, that's the one. Say okay and okay. And so what we'll get, and if I just maybe show you two windows here at a time, just so you can see the correlation between the two things. So if I go back to, let's take the first piece, we'll do the Zoom content, and I open that to dynamic content. Okay, so what I wanted to show you is, first of all, it's the email name. Okay, well, that's fine. That's clear. We've got that. Email ID. Yep, that's fine. We don't need to worry about that. Dynamic content component. Now, you saw in that particular email that there were, I think, 3 pieces of dynamic content. Actually, there's 4 in that particular email. So what I've got is, where's the Zoom? Here it is down here. So we've got these two here. So these two here, that's the name of the piece of dynamic content that you can see over here in the top left-hand corner. So that's the name of the individual piece of dynamic content, which has 2 rules in it, being a default and Zoom client. So we can see here default and Zoom client. And then we can see over here that there were 44 sends. So there were 44 emails went out the door where the Zoom information, sorry, the default was shown. And then there was 40 emails that went out the door where the Zoom information was shown. Okay. And then you can start to see the individual, the unique opens in that example, and then also email open ratio. So you can start to get quite detailed responses. You can see the pod one obviously is fairly different because we have loads of different clients on different pods in a range of different locations. And in fact, only, that's interesting, only one. No, that's the OAS, sorry, pod numbers. There was default. There was only one default, which is interesting. So we have pretty good information on our subscribers. We know largely which pod number they're on. There's just one person that we don't, okay? And yeah, and then just other information, other pieces of dynamic content that are contained in there. So that's how you can get to the reporting level. And you can obviously do a campaign as well. I just find the campaign one gets a bit crazy. There's lots of information to look at. So I'm usually wanting to focus on just one particular piece of information from Insight. So I hope that is helpful. All right, let's have a look now at streams of communication. And I'm going to encourage you again, please feel free to keep Adrian busy there with any questions. So here we have a rowing team, which I kind of went along with my streams of communication. I hope you kind of get that link there. So tailored engagement based on your first-party data. So the notion of streams of communication is to think about a way to communicate with your audience that is not so much a single message for everybody, that you in fact have multiple streams potentially. Largely the same type of content, but the messaging could be a little bit different. The more data you gather, obviously, both expressed and implied. So expressed being people have filled in forms or you know it because it's information you've captured through the CRM or an ERP, etc., other platforms. You know it about a person, so it enables you to go through a personalization process. And for some of you who have been around a little bit, as long as I have at least, if not longer, you'll remember there was, years ago, we talked about this big push of mobile first, mobile first. When we talked about emails, emails had to be mobile first. The principle being that if we designed for mobile, the emphasis being on responsive, then it's going to look fine on a desktop. But the problem is if we focused on emails for a desktop experience, then that didn't really take into the notion of responsiveness. Great principle. And I think we're kind of everyone's sold on that now. It's kind of the industry standard, I think, these days. I would suggest to you a notion of personalization first is something that we should also be thinking about. And the ability to, when we look at an email, don't see it as a flat, static piece of communication, but think about how that communication can be tailored and personalized in such a way to really enhance the messaging and hopefully enhance the engagement as well. And you can see here some interesting research from Epsilon Marketing and folks at Sender that there's definitely an appetite within marketers to want to do it, which is great. It's very or somewhat appealing for 90%. But if we look at the other side, consumers, they're expecting it. They really do expect for you to provide a level of personalization. Now, it should be so good that they're not even thinking about it, that they just open every email and it's relevant. It's kind of how I feel with my Netflix email updates. I don't know about how, well, I do know how Netflix do it because they know everything I watch. But everything they send me is like, they say, Derek, we think you're going to enjoy this. And I look at it, I'm like, you know what, Netflix, I think I am going to enjoy that. But they do that because they know what I watch, right? And they personalize their communications as they come out the door. One way to help you think about this is do a little bit of planning, and this is probably something you do already, where you look at your 12-month period, or you may plan for longer, and you have a range of campaigns. There'll be always-on campaigns, and the lead nurture campaign is the typical example that's always on. You may then have a newsletter schedule. Maybe your newsletter is once every 2 months, etc. You offset that with an event, potentially an in-person event. So you may run a few of those every year. You may offset those in the alternate months with a webinar, for instance, just to kind of keep things moving. And you may have onboarding campaigns. So onboarding campaigns for new customers versus, say, a welcome campaign, which is really just welcoming people to your database and welcome to the brand. And this is what we do. How can we help you? These are the types of services that we run, etc. But again, kind of always on. And then reactivation campaigns, looking at those less engaged contacts, and just been through this with a client. And, they uncovered something nearly 250,000 contacts within the database that hadn't been sent anything in the last 12 months. Now, they've got a big database, but that's still a big chunk of people. And so, there's some effort there now and some decisions to be made about, well, how do we re-engage that group and why aren't we talking to them? Why aren't we sending them anything? So something to think about. And I promise if you have a look at your own database, you'll find a percentage of people that would meet that same criteria. So worthwhile having a look at. Now, with all of that going on, it's not as though you're bombarding people necessarily. If we look at, say, in any given 2-month period, there may just be sort of 4 primary campaigns that if somebody actually meets the criteria for all of them, that would kind of be about a maximum that they might get. Now, there'll be other comms that you may run as well, but there's not necessarily a feeling of someone being overwhelmed. If they're subscribed to the newsletter and they're subscribed to events and they like webinars, etc., then it makes sense for you to communicate and get that information out to them. How do we personalize it at another level down, though? And in our emails and the landing page to have you join us today, we talked about the idea of just asking one question. If there was one question that we could ask that would really help us to deliver a more personalized experience, that's what we want to talk about now. And we kind of talked about the notion of a simplified persona. And we can probably have an intellectual debate about what a persona is in a marketing context. So I thought I'd stick with the English dictionary as one definition of persona, just to kind of keep it clean, without getting too technical on what personas are. But personas generally play a pretty big part in what we do as marketers in shaping the content and the information that we're trying to get across to people. So we thought we'd run with the Olympic theme today. So let's say we're going to focus on 3 primary types of people or personas, and they're swimmers, cyclists, and athletics. Now, remember with Eloqua, of course, there's always the default. So the default is for those people who are not swimmers, not cyclists, and not in athletics, they'll get a separate message in that process. And the point with this one simple question is that if you know a little about a person, it actually means you can deliver a lot. And you can deliver a lot in the context of the personalization and the messaging that you're getting across to people. And this possibly is more at a pre-sale exercise, at a lead identification process. Once someone becomes a customer, you already know a lot about them. And so there's probably a much greater level of ability for you to personalize because you know a lot more about them at that particular point. But when somebody's net new in your database, you typically don't want to be overly invasive, but you want to capture information that helps you qualify and understand who they are. And so the question that we find is one of the most effective. It's a very simple question. Which of the following best describes you? And it's a simple question. Now, the responses, obviously, that you provide give people as answers to the question. That's going to be unique for everybody on the call today. But once you have the question, well, what are the answers? Okay, so what's our question is, which of the following best describes you? Now, if you look at that audience that I showed you there a moment ago, swimmers, cyclists, and athletics, if you look at the Olympics, there are like 45 different disciplines in the current Paris Olympics. And within those 45 disciplines, there are subsets under those. So there's literally, I suppose there'd be a couple of hundred at least. So I've just thrown some as an example here. And so what we're able to do is we don't want to necessarily, because someone who rides a BMX bike versus someone who does, lengthy road bike sort of races, etc., they would consider themselves very different cyclists. So we don't want to just be generic and ask cyclists. Give them the ability to tell you that they are in fact a road cyclist or they are in fact a BMX freestyling cyclist. That's great. But we can take that information and we can roll it up. We don't need to get that granular necessarily. Now, it will depend on what your campaign objective is as to whether or not you think that is good information to have. But what we can do is take those responses and then roll them up underneath. And we can use Eloqua to do this for you, by the way. So Eloqua has some great tools built in. That means that if someone tells you that they swim the 200-meter backstroke, you can then populate another field called persona called swimmers. That's it. And so that's the value that you're going to use to drive imagery. If you think about the Olympics and people coming to the Olympics, it could be, well, here are all the swimming venues. Here are the hotels and accommodation options that are closest to the swimming centers, etc., throughout the games. If you're looking for tours or ticketing or anything like that, this is what you're going to want to look at if swimming is what is your primary interest. And that's what I mean by if we ask one simple question, we can actually deliver a lot based on that response. So have a think about the people you talk to and think about if you were to ask them a question, which of the following best describes you? It's a nice, simple question. It's not as invasive as what's your job title, those sorts of things. We really want to try and connect with the person. And so we think this is a great question. And we use the question ourselves. We have clients that use the question, and it does get the right results. So once you've got that information, where do you put it? Okay. So it'll obviously live forever in the form. That's one place, but not much use to you sitting in the form. You need to put it somewhere. And so we can either put it on the contact. The contact's a good place to put it. It makes sense. Depending on what your contact looks like and how much space you have available, maybe a custom object is an alternative place for you to put it. But it doesn't matter where you put it in the context of dynamic content, because as you saw earlier, we can access both. So it's really no drama as to where it goes. So now that you know a little, as I said, you can deliver a lot. And so now we can deliver a far more personalized experience in our communications and our imagery to these known personas that we're talking to and trying to motivate to do something and to potentially purchase and do all those sorts of fun things with us and engage in some way. All right. So I see we're not being flooded by questions. So let's jump in quickly. We're a little bit over, but we'll finish off here with Redwood. Now, the key thing I wanted you to know in relation to the Redwood interface is that by the time you log in November, which may feel like it's forever away, but the default user interface by November will be Redwood. Okay, so today when you log in, you have the ability to choose and you can make changes if you want to and go backwards and forwards between the two. By the time we get to November, when you log in, Redwood will be the default, and you'll then need to proactively tick the box to go back to the old experience. Now, please be aware that as new innovations with Eloqua are unrolled, certainly starting with the next release, which is release 24C, and then 24D, which is due in November, some of the enhancements that will start to arrive won't be visible in the old interface. You'll have to be using Redwood in order to take advantage of some of those. So the message there is the sooner you can become familiar with Redwood, the better off you will be. Okay, so this is what Eloqua looks like today if you're not using Redwood. This is the previous interface. I just want to show you quickly how you turn it on. So very simple, and each user can do this individually themselves. It doesn't have to be done by the admin, and you no longer have to log a service request in order to have it turned on. It's now available for everybody. Access the hamburger menu in the top left-hand corner of the screen. From the hamburger menu, you'll see all the way down the bottom, in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, use Redwood Experience. Just go ahead and tick the box and you're done. And that will change the whole interface over for you. The other thing that has arrived with the current release is that what they're calling, it's a new user profile, and it's a user access setting called Asset Manager. And so what Asset Manager will do, and for the admins who are on the call today, you'll see that they're under privileged access. It's a single check for Asset Manager. It gives the person the ability to view, edit, delete, set security, and activate permissions to all assets. Now, the key thing is it bypasses the asset permissions granted by security groups. So please be aware, this is not the level of access you want to grant just merrily to anybody. These people should have some training. They should understand how Eloqua works, and understanding what deletion means, that once it's deleted, it's gone. We just want to make sure that they're a little bit skilled before you roll it out to everybody. But the group that this is most appropriate for is probably the brand team, the team who are developing your artwork, your assets, etc. This would enable them to have the right level of access to come into Eloqua, to update templates, to add images to the image library, etc., and so on and so forth. So have a little think about that one. It could be handy and could save you some time as well. So if you'd like to get that email that I showed you during today's webinar, the important update email, you can scan that QR code on the left-hand side of your screen, which is subscribe now. If you're unsure about Redwood and want a bit more information and just want to recap on how you turn it on, you can also scan the QR code on the right-hand side of the screen, which will take you to a landing page. We'll have that same link, or both of those will be in the blog post for you for this month, as for this release as well. And it's 24C. Sorry, I keep getting myself confused. C for Charlie. So third release for the year. The next one is 24D, due in November. All right. All right, thanks, folks. We've gone a little bit over there. I do apologize. We look forward to seeing you next month. Please be aware, today we've met on Thursday. Next month, we're meeting on Wednesday, the 4th of September. We look forward to seeing you next month. We'll get some information to you for the replay from today and obviously access to our blog. And again, if you do have questions, please feel free to answer those questions and just go to myeloqua.com and you can answer those questions and we will get back to you. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful day and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.